Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as Ledep, and welcome to another episode of Top Deck Fonts. We're actually going to talk about cards that are essentially got spoiled for the first day of Ikoria. I do have to admit it was fun seeing the spoiler, seeing all the shenanigans that happened. So what I'm going to do now is essentially go through the cards that have been spoiled so far on day one, and just essentially give my quick observation of them and seeing their practicality in both standard as well as commander. And if I have any other input in potentially other formats, I will allow that input to happen and such. So nevertheless, the site that I'm using to show the cards off is actually Scryfall. I usually like using this site as well as Mythic Spoilers to check up with recent spoilers of the new sets and such. I would say give them a look, give them, kind of like clicks and such. It's always fun just to see what they have and such. Nevertheless, also one thing I do want to ask before we start, I'm wondering if this is the methodology in which I'm going to talk about spoilers and such. So if you want me to keep continuing using top deck fonts and such to do this, or have it as a separate video, just let me know in the comments down below. I would appreciate that. As well as one thing to let people know, this is just a quick first glimpse on something. It's not necessarily a full review of the card. I usually wait till the full set's revealed before I get like my final 2 cents on something, and usually I have a video that I call like top cards to look at or such, or cards to keep an eye on from a new set, essentially, as I did for past sets and such, where I do talk about cards that I think it's really, really significant and such. Nevertheless, with all the disclaimers out of the way, let's actually get started. First card we're going to talk about is actually Primal Empathy. 1 green and a blue for an enchantment that is, at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if you control a creature with the greatest power among creatures in the battlefield. Otherwise, put a 1/1/1 counter on a creature you control. I still love the flavor text on this. From this day forward, we confront this world together, lifting each other up. Honestly, that flavor text is really needed, especially with how we need to lift each other up with life and such. So it's really nice to see this card. As for the practicality, this is a really good commander card, I would say, especially if you are a Simic Stompy deck. The factor that this can be a significantly, just like a Phyrexian Arena to get you additional card draw. Never underestimate card draw on commander. As well, I do think this is a card that is just beneficial. Like, you do want to get your creatures bigger. Getting the +1/+1 counters on them is very significant. It can be tested in stuff like Experimental Crudge and such, so I think that's where it's going to see its primary play. In standard, it's definitely nice food for thought. I do think it's a little bit slow, though, at least from first glance. I do think it's a cute card, and I do think it is a card that is just going to be interesting, at least to try and limit it. I do think it's even slow in that format, personally, but still, I do think this is a great commander card, though. I will say that right off the bat. Next up, it is the Labyrinth Raptor. Really scary creature. Red and a black for a creature nightmare dinosaur with menace. It's a 2/2, and it has whenever a creature you control with menace becomes block, defending player sacrifices a creature blocking it. And then it has red and a black for creatures you control with menace gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Overall, this is actually a really decent Beowulf upside. I mean, the factor that it's a 2/2 with menace, that is very relevant abilities. And the factor that essentially, if the opponent wants to block it to prevent the damage, they will be forced to sacrifice something, will make kind of like combat a little bit awkward. Now, granted, defending player has the choice of what they sack, so if they block with like really big creatures and such, they will of course choose the bigger creatures and then make sure that the damage then just the Labyrinth Raptor will die and such. So you got to keep that in mind. Still, the factor that this is also kind of like a semi-anthem, that it affects every creature you control with menace, and especially since we're going to show that there are other ways to give your creatures menace within the set and such, as well as popular menace menace creature cards that could be coming from the set, I do think this is a really potentially good card. I am not, like for standard, for aggro-based decks, I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be totally competitively viable, but it is a dinosaur, and a lot of people love to get new dinosaurs and such to test out, and it's also a nightmare, so who knows, nightmare tribal. Still, I think it's a really cool card. Definitely has some commander implications, especially if you run a lot of menace creatures, but we'll see. Next up, we're actually going to look at the alternate art of this. We will skip this one once we get to the regular art of it, but this is one of the showcase arts where they have kind of like free showcase art, or two showcase arts. They have this comic book variation showcase art, as well as they have the kind of Godzilla based promo showcase art, if it has that treatment and such. So, clarification, there is actually some cards here that do have the Godzilla promo art. I don't think we see it right here. Oh, here we go. Like stuff like this, essentially. We'll get to these cards once we get to them, but there are some cards that do have, due to cooperation with Toho on this project, they do have some cards where the alternate art is actually stuff based on their franchise and such, like Mechagodzilla, Godzilla, all your basic favorite kaiju monsters and such. It's actually a really cool promo series they're doing. I know a lot of people are very excited for it. Nevertheless, let's actually get to the card itself, which I don't know the official translation, but it's always fun to see. That's the one thing that's also hilarious. It's always fun to see their translation of the card because they always make funny translations, which is, in this case, their translations, that which pew-pews. It's 2 black and a black for a creature bat, but it also has morph of 4 black, so 6 to mutate this, which is very costly. Now, for context, for people who don't know what mutate is, this is one of the new mechanics of the set. Basically, it works like this. When a creature's on the battlefield, you have the choice of cards that you have mutate in your hand. You have the chance of paying the mutate cost. If you pay the mutate cost for that creature, you have the choice of either, as they say here, you could have put it over or under target non-human creature you own. So, nope, you can't throw these in any human tribal shenanigans. They mutate into the creature on top plus all abilities from under it. So, what it basically means is essentially, and this is the best way to clarify it, is, for example, let's say this is mutated on top. This creature will still have its abilities and such. It's still going to be having this name, its mana cost, and the toughness and such. But the stuff that's below it will still have additional abilities. It won't get additional power or toughness, but it will get additional abilities. Like, let's say if it has like activated abilities or static abilities, it will still keep those with the mutation, essentially. And vice versa. Like, let's say if there's a creature that mutated over this, it's going to keep that creature's converted mana cost and essentially like toughness and power. And then it will just have the ability that this has. And what ability does this have? Well, it has Flash, it has Flying, and it says, whenever this creature mutates, destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So, this is a very powerful ability. I will say that right off the bat. Now, the catch-22 with this is you don't feel mutating this for 6 is costly. This is one of the rare mutates we're going to see where the mutate cost is higher than the actual creature casting cost if you cast it as a normal creature. However, I do think this card is pretty powerful because there is a lot of also cheap mutates that we're seeing within the set. Like, not like cheap, but pretty cheap. And I do feel like if this card can survive removal or such, or if there's ways to protect it, being able to, every time you mutate something, be able to do unconditional removal, that is pretty powerful. Now, is this going to replace stuff like Murderous Rider and Standard and such? Probably not, but I could see it like maybe something that I could definitely see this in Brawl potentially. Like if you have your Brawl commander that does mutate shenanigans, and this helps out a lot within your deck design. In Standard, maybe as a 1 or 2 up. And that is a maybe, and it depends on whether or not mutate will be a very competitive Standard mechanic. Which my first glimpse at it is, it has the potential, but I highly doubt it. I think this is more like a cool limited base mechanic and a fun like jank brew mechanic. Like I'm gonna love doing all the jank brews with the mutate shenanigans and such. But I do feel like this is a really, really tricky one because mutate in general is kind of like auras in the sense that you could potentially 2-for-1 yourself. Now, one clarification I will admit, they did kind of have a little compensation to the rule with that. Like let's say you try to attempt to mutate on a creature, and then the creature that you're trying to mutate on gets removed, then what happens is that the creature then will actually go onto the battlefield rather than go straight to the graveyard along with the other creatures. So there is a semi-benefit that you still get a creature out of it. So it is not a 2-for-1 exactly before the cast. But once the creature's big, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then somebody like edicts you or does a board wipe or such, and we have to know that we have really good removal and board wipes in the meta. Then this card, the mutate mechanic, then becomes a lot more cautious. Like, you definitely have to find ways to protect your creatures and such. I still like it. Like, it is fun to have these Voltron-y base kind of like deck designs, but you do have to keep in mind with the meta and such. I still think this is going to be a fun brawl and fun commander shenanigans, so nevertheless, I like the card, but I do think it is one of those where I don't know how impactful it's going to be in Standard. But that's just a first glance. This card, though, that I actually kind of like, even though it's not great, the Crystal Giant. It is, well, that's what they name it. It's essentially a free mana artifact creature giant. And it's at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose Flying, First Strike, Death Touch, Hexproof, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, Vigilance, or +1/+1 at random. Put a counter of that kind on this card. And the reason why they say Mechagodzilla is because the promo art of variation of this is actually Mechagodzilla, which is kind of amazing. Okay. Mostly the main reason why I like this card a lot is because it's a giant. And I'm kind of tempted to throw this in kind of like a Naya Giants type of list. I think that's going to be really fun. Because especially since, one, it's a giant that's not mana restricted. It's colorless. So pretty much no matter what your mana is like in your giants list, if you go like Naya, go red-green giants or such, you are still going to get this out relatively on turn free as long as you get your third mana out. And the thing that people need to keep in mind with this card is the factor is you choose these things at the beginning of combat, which I do think is a very, very relevant part of this card. Now, there is one weakness to the card. I do think the primary weakness of this card is it's a very random card. Like, I don't think you should play this card in the sense that you think you're going to get a specific thing. Like, I've seen so many people go into best case mentality and being like, oh, I'm going to play this, and it's going to automatically get hexproof, and it's going to be protected. Yay. No. There's chances are with this card might get random stuff. And as far as I'm aware with the ruling, it can get duplicates of stuff, which is kind of a little annoying, so you gotta keep that in mind. This is definitely one of those cards where it's more, I feel like it's going to be a lot more easier playable on digital formats than paper, because rolling the die consistently just to see if this gets bigger and bigger and such is going to be a little bit obnoxious. Still, that does leave us to the mechanic of the new mechanic in the set, which is kind of like mechanic counters. So, in the set, there are ways to give your creatures kind of like a mechanic counter that's based on a general mechanic evergreen mechanic that we see in sets. Such as Flying, First Strike, Death Touch, Hexproof, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, Vigilance. Like that, essentially. So, essentially, once you give that creature that counter, it is going to have that ability on the creature itself. So, for example, if you give a creature a trample counter, it's going to have trample, and vice versa, etc., etc. As I'd say, giving trample on a questing beast is going to be kind of silly, so I like this card. I do think it's more of a limited bomb. I do want to test it in Constructed for some shenanigans with giants, but I do realize the variance of this card is probably going to be one of its main weaknesses. But it also could be argued to be one of its main strengths, depending on who you ask. Okay, then there's the extended art. There's also the regular art of the card I was talking about before. And then now we got our egg that Mark Rosewater was talking about in his preview. And technically it's called the Moth Egg, but Scryfall called it the Beaster Egg. It's a 1-mana egg. It is an egg. It's a 0/2. And whenever this creature mutates, put a +1/+1 counter on it. I think the egg commander decks are going to appreciate this card as well. Along with that, though, I do think this is kind of one of those cards that is interesting because it is definitely not like a great card at first glance, but it is a cheap card that does get a beneficial synergy once you mutate something. So it depends on how cheap mutates are going to be in the set, and if we have a lot of counter-based synergies, like Proliferate and such, that we have in Standard, I could see this as being like a test card in like a really, really janky brew deck. I highly doubt it, but it's definitely one I'm going to keep my eye on, because it is definitely a fun brew around me, kind of like beginner card kind of scenario. I do think it is one that might hatch into just some jank, but we'll see. Next up is a legendary creature, which is our King Kong of the set, Kogla, the Titanite. I swear, I really, really wish they have an alternate art promo where it's King Kong. Come on, Wizards, please provide us that. Anyway, it is a free green, so 6 mana for a legendary creature ape. It's a 7/6. And when it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. When it attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. And it also has an activated ability of 1 in the green to return target human you control to its owner's hand. Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn. This card is nutty. This is a really good card. I don't know if this is a commander card per se. Like, you can make him as your commander, obviously, or a brawler. But I do think this is a card that is going to go into the 99 or going into the 36 in brawls and such, or commander, because this card is a very versatile card. One, just the ability to fight with a 7/6 for 6 mana. That's going to kill a lot of things in the format. Plus the factor that when it attacks, you can then do just a destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. That is very relevant, especially with a lot of enchantment-based decks and such. So, or destroying a very problematic enchantment like Smothering type in Commander and such, or just maybe even someone's Soul Rain and such. So, that's a very powerful ability. And even the human ability on the card. First of all, great mechanics win there, especially with flavor of what the movie is about with King Kong and such. When you consider that, that's just one of the really good mechanical puns they had. I do think that's also relevant too, because Commander does have a lot of popular humans that people want to play, even if they're not playing human tribal. And the factor that then you can just use this to just return maybe a good human with a good ETB, or just return it just to give this indestructible, can be really nifty for a good combat trick and such. As for standard, I think there's a chance. I do think this is a chance of a card to test in Temur Clover decks, personally. Mostly because I do think it helps you against the mirror matchup. I do think also the factor that you can return humans to give this indestructible is really relevant, because this can actually be used as a semi-way to protect your Edgewall Innkeepers and such, which I do think is very relevant. And also just being able to destroy any annoying artifact or enchantment, and this standard has plenty of them, as long as they're not gods. You can actually destroy some pretty powerful cards, which is Oven, Lucky Clover, Fires of Invention. I could go on. So I could see this possibility in Temur Clover. I could also see this as a possibility in Gruul Stompy, potentially. Nevertheless, I really like the card. I like the flavor. It's a very powerful card. I'm just going to say that right off the bat. Next up, Mechagodzilla, which is, of course, this. So we're going to go on to the next one, which is the alternate art for the bat. This is the alternate art for the egg. So now we're going to go to the another card in the set, which is Sprite Dragon. This is a doozy. Red and a blue, 1/1, Fairy Dragon. Awesome. I know Chase from Mana Curves is going nuts over this card. Anyway, it has flying and haste, and then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on a Sprite Dragon. This is very good. This is a really good card. Like, red and blue tempo has been a thing that people have been trying to do in Standard and such, and the payoffs have been alright, but this is a really good payoff. Like, the factor is, we still have really good counter magic like Quint and such. The only thing we're missing is like a cheap 1-cost counter spell and such. But this card is just a really good aggressive unit. And then we have kind of like pretty much flash-based shenanigans and such. Now, you're going to have to go a roundabout way of giving this flash. Like, you have to either go in Temur and put in Vivian from War of the Spark, or play Leyline of Anticipation and such. But if there are ways to give this flash, then it becomes a lot more sillier. Still, a 2-mana 1/1 that just swings in, and then anytime you cast a non-creature spell, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. This is way better than Prowess. It's pretty scary, and it is definitely one of those cards that, at worst, it's a card that people are just going to have to answer to automatically because they worry about how it's going to get big, which then you can use that as a semi-way to more or less just be able to fish out removal so you can play your mid-range to late-game threats, essentially. So, plus also turn 2 this and turn 3 Narset is just going to be, or turn 2 this and turn 3 Teferi is just going to be. So yeah, this card is really good. I do think it is going to see some standard play if a red-blue tempo aggro list is going to be a thing. It has a potential to be. This card is just really, really good. Plus, I mean, come on, that art is adorable, as well as the alternate art if we see it, but that art is adorable. And the flavor text, size of a Pitsy, rage of a Hellkite. Next up, we're going to, I think I'm just going to go with the, well, first here's the alternate art for the Sprite Dragon, but let's actually look at the original card for this one. It's a new legendary creature, Brokos, 8 Pets of Forever, 2 in Soul Tie, black, green, and blue, for a legendary creature, Nightmare Beast Elemental. A lot of relevant creature types. It is a 6 with trample. You may cast Brokos, 8 Pets of Forever from your graveyard using its mutate ability. Its mutate ability is also 5 mana as well, but the catch is when you mutate, you have to spend 2 green rather than having to spend just Soul Tie. It's 2 blue or black and 2 green. And I already talked about mutate, so I'm not going to go into that again. But do I think this card's really good? I think Commander, it's a really powerful card. Just the factor that Soul Tie good stuff is a deck, and I think this could see play in Modrolfa in either the 99. You could even run this as your commander because that mutate ability. The really cool thing about the mutate ability is it does go over the commander tats as far as I'm aware with the ruling and such. So the factor that as long as you don't go against much graveyard hate, you can constantly recast this from your graveyard to put on a creature as long as you're running a creature-oriented deck design. Very absurd. Just giving a creature the ability of trample, especially you could put that on some ridiculously big creatures. So yeah, I like this card a lot. For standard, this is definitely in the colors. Soul Tie Ramp is definitely a thing, and I do think they might give it a shot. I could even see some Reanimator base lists giving it a shot, but it is definitely a we'll see like that. Cue what I talked about mutated previously earlier in the video. And then the alternate art comic is just gorgeous, as well as the Spacegodzilla alternate art for that card is great. Okay, let's just go. Let's not talk about this alternate art because they already did an article on this, but let's actually talk about this card itself. Spacegodzilla Void Invader. It's an 8 mana 8/8, so it's really big uncommon nightmare horror. It has Death Touch, and it has cycling of 2 and a black. So that's a new mechanic. Well, not new. It's a returning mechanic from the set. We got cycling again, which is awesome. But what does cycling do with this? Well, when you cycle something, you're essentially going to discard this card and you draw a card. So what does this do when you cycle it? Well, when you cycle Void Beckner, put a Death Touch counter on a target creature control. I think people should not really sleep on these cards. I do think these cards do have a slight potential of being standard competitive. Mostly because one thing people need to keep in mind with Cycle can be activated instant speed. So you can, for example, attack with your creature, opponent's just going to do an optimal block, like you can like tack in with like a simple 1/1, and the opponent's like, oh, I'm just going to block it with my 2/2 or 5/5 or such, and then you can just automatically cycle, put the Death Touch counter on it, and it immediately do instant removal. I think that is a very powerful ability on this card. Plus, also another thing to keep in mind, Reanimator-based strategy decks are a thing, and this is like a perfect on-curve play in some decks. Like the fact that you can cycle this on turn 3, and then Reanimate it with Blood for Bones on turn 4, as long as you have a creature on either on your first turn or second turn, that is very relevant. So I do think this card does actually have some chance for some competitive play, honestly, because that Death Touch... Instant speed Death Touch is nothing to underestimate, especially when you draw. Now, some people are going to look at this and like, wait, don't we have like Gil's Arachnica cards that were like instant sorcery speed that did the same thing? Yes, but keep in mind, those instant sorcery speeds did not also provide you an 8/8 Death Touch Nightmare Horror creature in the graveyard that you can reanimate later. Just keep that in mind. Then also the green relevant of this ability, which they get the Godzilla problem, but let's look actually at the regular card. This card also is really good. Titan of Threats, 7 green, 9 mana, 11/11 trample, so it costs a lot. It's a Dinosaur Beast, and it has the cycling of 1 in the green, so you can discard this card to draw a card. But when you cycle this, you can put a trample counter on target creature you control. This card is nuts. And the reason why this card is nuts is because Questing Beast is a card in the format. The fact that you can get Questing Beast on turn 4 and then next turn just attack in with Questing Beast and then just get the blocks ready, and then you can just cycle this and put trample on it, really silly. It's not like Embercleave levels of silly. Like, I think many people are still going to do the Embercleave shenanigans with Questing Beasts and such because, one, those shenanigans are awesome, but this is still a pretty close second thing if you don't have an Embercleave in hand. Plus, also same thing applies as I said with the Death Touch thing. If you have any reanimated based strategies, just reanimating this is really silly because 11/11 trample can be a game finisher. Plus, also, ramp is a very popular archetype in this format, so you can get to 9 mana in green pretty easy, especially with stuff like Nissa and such. So don't sleep on this card. I do think this card will see some competitive play, especially when there are easy ways to give creatures haste in this format. So in Commander, I say also yeah to that. I do see this card as just cycling cards with very powerful late game effects. Don't never underestimate them. Next up, we're going to talk about the Grim Dancer. It is a free mana free, and it enters the battlefield with your choice of 2 different counters on it from Amon Menace, Death Touch, and Lifelink. Honestly, just a really good limited card. I don't really see this seeing play in Standard per se, because mostly, while those abilities are nice, I do think it is kind of one of those cards where, I mean, I don't know. You could make an argument that this can, in some instances, be kind of like a very powerful, modifiable Vampire Nighthawk, except not flying. But we had these type of cards in the past and such, and some of them do really good, and some of them don't do really good, so I don't know. This one I'm going 50-50 on, actually, now the more that I think about it. It's just one of those cards where I think I have to play with it and see, but I do feel like this is one of those cards where maybe it's definitely going to be a fun card to play in Death Touch Tribal, which is a deck archetype I have in my Janky shenanigans, but who knows? I'm going to go coin flip on this. This is a coin flip card. It's either really good in Standard or it's just meh. For Commander, honestly, if you're playing Nightmare Travel, here you go. Next up, in a creature-oriented set, we obviously have to have counter magic to keep it in check, so we have Essence Scatter, again as a reprint, with really gorgeous Seth MacKinnon art. I'm almost tempted to back the Kickstarter if they have this as one of the available playmat arts, because this art is... Always love Seth MacKinnon art. Nevertheless, the card, we all know what Essence Scatter is. Counter target creature spell. I do think this card will be relevant in Standard, because yes, a lot of people are going to be playing creatures. Whether or not it's going to be main board playable or sideboard playable, it's depending on how the format changes. If it's more creature-oriented, then yeah. But if it's not, if it's more kind of like the Jeskai Firebase deck designs or such, then maybe not. But one thing to keep in mind, I do think this card might still see a little bit more play, because it is an easy way to counter, like, early game Titans and such. However, people could say Mystical Dispute does that, but on the other side of the coin, it doesn't counter Krotzes, so, something to keep in mind. But yeah, probably we'll see Standard play. We all know what Essence Scatter does. It doesn't really need much talking about. Next up, we got the Polywog Symbiote, 1 in a blue for a creature flag. Each creature spell you cast costs 1 less to cast if it has Mutate, and whenever you cast a creature spell, if it has Mutate, draw a card and discard a card. I like this card a lot. It's a 2 mana 1/3, which is decent stats. But the fact that it does give your creatures -1 deduction is nothing to underestimate. That is always creature reduction spells is something to always keep in mind. I would say keep an eye on Nylea from Pharaohs. Also keep an eye on Polywog Symbiote. Now yes, the reduction is only happening on creatures that have each creature spell you cast costs 1 less to cast if it has Mutate. It only will work on Mutate creatures, but we have been seeing some really good Mutate creatures in the set that it would be really nifty to get 1 more ramp into it and such. Plus, the ability to essentially loot when you mutate is also really nice as well, or even do you have to mutate? No, if it has Mutate, you can just loot. So even if you cast a creature by itself, You still get the loot effect, which is very good, and it's also in blue, which blue-black is the reanimation kind of archetype. Not draft archetype per se, but it is an archetype in standard. So yeah, definitely like this card potentially for standard, but I do think it also has some pretty relevance in commander, especially if you are doing mutate tribal or doing mutate shenanigans. And I'm probably obviously going to put this in my general surgeon commander deck if I go into a mutate route. So something to keep in mind. Plus, also the alternate art is Baby Godzilla, which is they are killing it with this. Okay, now we actually get to a new mechanic that's in the set, and we can actually talk about. Now they have this new set called Companion. Now, what a companion is essentially what companion is they're going to give you these weird restrictions on how you build your deck. Now, if you meet the deck building restrictions, you can actually have one copy of this in your sideboard, so this does take your sideboard slot. You gotta keep that in mind. But you can cast it for free outside of the game. It's like considered in your hand, or kind of like in the commander zone, for example. So, for example, like with this Ooze, Umoli the Collector, 2 Gregari colors of hybrid. It is a legendary creature Ooze, with the companion requirement being each non-land card in your starting deck shares a card type. Okay, so then what happens if you meet with that deck building restriction? Well, then you can cast this from your sideboard and such. Now, I'm not 100% sure if you can still have copies of it within your deck and such, and then you have like a 5th copy in the sideboard that is quote-unquote your companion card. I think that's not the case. I do think you can also have copies within your deck as well. But granted, they are very restricted. Like this one is, if you do that, then you're definitely going to have to share the card type of being a creature and such, or, stuff like that. But what happens when you meet that restriction? Well, then this enters the battlefield, you will choose a card type. Most likely you're going to choose the card type that you meet your deck restriction companion requirement with. And if you do, spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. This one's interesting. I think it has potentially in Sultai ramp. The problem is, though, these companion cards are interesting, but I do think the deck building requirements will make them either very playable in standard or not so playable. Like, for example, in this one, you would think right off the bat, oh, maybe I could put this in like Sultai ramp and such. But then when you look at the deck building restriction requirements and think about how many spells of different types you play in deck designs, then this card gets a lot more restrictive. Now, to be fair, if you decide to meet with the requirement, that deduction can be very, very silly, especially if you do this. And also one thing to keep in mind, it's not like Commander where you have to keep restriction to Commander color, so you can put this in like a free colored deck and such, or even a one color monocolored deck. So I do think this has potential, like maybe in mono green or mono black, actually, the more I think about it, because getting the cost deduction there is actually a lot more relevant. And I know a lot of mono black decks and mono green decks that are just heavy creature oriented. And seeing that we have a lot of creatures that have good, powerful ETBs, yeah, this has a chance. It has a chance. I'm not sure yet, but I do like the card. Next up, we're going to talk about one card that I really want to brew around in this set. Well, actually, first, let's talk about... There we go, this one. So this is another mutate card. Huntmaster Liger, which is a cat, which, with great comic book alternates art, it's a free 4 with mutate 2 and a white, so what happens when you mutate? Whenever this creature mutates, other creatures you control get +X until in a turn where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. So this is a weird kind of card that wants to be kind of like a, more or less a very, very... It wants to go in a go wide deck because then you get the beneficial from the mutate effect, but it also is kind of like a semi go tall, go wide deck, or maybe a hybrid of the two. I like this card for limited. In standard, I'm not 100% sure, but it's definitely an interesting food for thought, especially with all these mutated mechanics. You got to keep in mind with mutate that it's basically you can give this card an ability to any powerful standard creature that we have in the meta. And we do have a lot of really push creatures in the meta, so maybe giving this ability even at least to a creature within our deck design could just be something to be considered about. So, I like the card. I definitely like it for limited. Standard is maybe. Commander, if you're doing the mutate deck, well, hey, this is probably an auto-include. Next up, we're going to get to one of my kind of like favorite legendary cards that is a beast, specifically. We're going to talk about another one here. Snapadats, Apex of the Hunt. 1 in Mardu. Mardu is one of my favorite color combinations. For legendary creature, Dinosaur Cat Nightmare. It has mutate of 2 hybrid of either just red or black and 2 white. So kind of like the same theme that this has, but interesting, the mutate costs more than actually casting the creature by itself. Why is that? Well, because the abilities you get on this creature, it can either be a free 5 that has double strike, and whenever this creature mutates, it deals 4 damage to a target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and you gain 4 life. Oh, if there is any incentive to want me to do Mardu mid-range, it is this card. This card is silly. I mean, if we can get a lot of good mutate, like even cheap mutate abilities, it's a very good card. Like, even if we just ignore the second part of this text, just essentially a mutate ability to help us just give a creature double strike, very relevant. Like, being able to give double strike to any creature can be scary, especially with some of the creatures we have in this meta. Also, just by itself, even if you don't mutate it at all, a 4 mana, just free 5 that has double strike and that ability, very powerful. I like this card a lot. I definitely want to kind of like brew on this for Brawl. I do also like this potentially for Standard, because just a 4 mana free 5 double strike is just really, really good. Especially when you consider the fact that we do have cards in the set that will give this card additional abilities. We don't even have to just mutate. We can still just give other abilities to this with other cards in the set. I like this card a lot. Whether or not it's going to be like a Standard All-Star, we'll see. Next up, Bristling Boar, 3 in the green. Creature Boar, 4/3, can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. With Mutate, I think it's going to be an interesting card that people will try to mutate this with in Limited. Standard, for budget decks, I could see it, but probably not. And then in Commander, if you really need that ability, maybe, but there are better cards to do that type of effect in the format. Next up, a companion that, honestly, I love the creature type, I love the name. Not 100% fan of the companion aspect of this card, but I'll explain. It is Karuna the Macro Sage, free green hybrid of Simic. For legendary creature Dinosaur Hippo, it's a 5/4 companion, and this is something you gotta keep in mind. The companion requirement to have this as your companion, your starting deck contains only cards with converted mana cost 3 or greater and land cards. If this card is your chosen companion, you may cast it once from outside the game. So what does it do? Well, it has the ability that when it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each other permanent you control with converted mana cost 3 or greater. So that sounds really good. Like, we're going to make a deck that only has 3 or more or high cost permanents, and then we're going to get a lot of card draw from it. That's going to be awesome. What's the detrimental of this? The detriment of this is this wants to be kind of like in a Simic Stompy list, but the problem is the majority of Simic Stompy lists are ramp-based archetypes. And the catch-22 is a majority of the good ramp in Standard at the moment, with the exception of Nissa, is less than free. We're talking about our Growth Spirals, our Arboreal Grazers, our Paradise Druids, etc. So, I do think this deck restriction is more of a cost than people are saying, because the way you really have to look at this is, unless you're playing kind of like Scry-Rams to help Scry and such, you're essentially taking your first 2 turns off to get this effect, because you gotta wait till like turn 3 to essentially be able to play anything. And that can be a very, very detrimental cost. So I think personally, I do think this card has a semi-chance to play in like main decks, not as a companion base. I do think it's a fun brew around just to give it a shot and see what happens. But I do think it is one of those cards that is a lot more detrimental than people are saying. I still like the card. I like the creature archetype, and I do like it kind of like a commander, because that ability is actually pretty nice. Like, I might consider it for Yarok just in the main board. But as a companion, I do think the deck building requirements for it to play it as your companion is very, very costly, especially with how fast this format can be, in my personal opinion. Next up, we're going to talk about the Zagoth Mamba, a 1 black uncommon Nightmare Snake. Whenever this creature mutates, target creature and opponent controls get -2/-2 until end of turn. Very good limited card, I would say, especially if they... It seems like Mutate's going to be a very fun limited mechanic, so I do feel like this card, being able to give a beginning creatures -2/-2 and such is very powerful. Could also help against combat-based shenanigans and such, so keep that in mind. Standard, probably not. Usually when you want to play a 1-drop, we have stuff like the Knight of Ebon Legion and such. There are more powerful 1-drops than this. So, I mean, unless you want to play Nightmare Tribal. In Commander, I mean, if you want to put it in your Mutate deck, have fun, but I think there are better options. Next up, Moscow Ikoria, 2 and a green, 2/4 Vigilance. Honestly, mostly just good limited fodder. Especially the attached cards with Mutate with. That's pretty much it. Next up is the Cloud Piercer, there we go. 4 and a red for a 5/4 with Mutate of 4, and it has Reach, and whenever this creature mutates, you discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So you rummage, technically. This card's not bad. I don't know if it will see much standard play, but I do like it how it is a good way to show off kind of like how the Mutate mechanic kind of works. Still, getting Reach on any creature is something to keep in mind. That's a pretty powerful ability, especially if we are in a meta where those could be potential good flyers, especially since we're going to see one Mythic that is a very powerful Mythic. We'll get to it once we get to it, and maybe being able to give one of our powerful creatures Reach is nothing to underestimate. Though, whether or not you rather use Mutate or rather you use the Cycling as the more competitive mechanic, we're going to have to wait and see. But nevertheless, good limited fodder. Maybe some standard play, maybe some commander play. Next up, Fully Grown, 2 and a green, instant. Target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Put a trample counter on it. Maybe. This one is a maybe. Now granted, free mana for a giant growth is really, really costly. And it's going to be a really tricky combat trick. But giving your creatures permanent trample, nothing to underestimate, especially with how many powerful creatures we have in this meta. So, I mean, granted, it's probably not going to see much play since we still, in this color pie, we have stuff like Hydra Craces. But yet, the same argument applies. Maybe you can do this to, like, Questing Beasts or any other powerful creatures that giving a trample would be silly. So, something to keep in mind. I think it's definitely a good budget alternative to some extent. Next up, finally a popper playable card. Steiner, 1 in a red for a human wizard 2/2, so it's a bear with upside, and boy is it upside. Whenever you cycle another card, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and it has even cycling itself for 1 mana. This card's really good for Popper. Popper is a format that loves their cycling spells. They cycle a lot, and the fact that you can put this in a deck where Burn usually likes to cycle cards to get more burn spells and such, the fact that you can play this on turn 2 to just essentially get little peens in, little peens in, little peens in, little peens in. Very powerful ability. And the fact that even in later game, you could just, if you feel like you don't need the bear, honestly, I think you are going to 90% of the time cast this as the bear with the upside. But the fact that you do have the choice to cycle when you feel like you need to, I think that is very relevant, especially if you put this like in a tempo list where you might just trick someone into thinking you don't have your counter magic, and then you cycle and try to draw into your counter magic and such. So, very powerful popper card. I do think this will see a lot of popper play in the right decks. Next up, we're going to talk about Vedrok, a Pets of Thunder, a Jeskai, free cost Jeskai. So just Jeskai colors for a free, or you can mutate it for 1 blue or white hybrid and 2 red for its mutate cost. To have a creature flying first strike, it's a free. Then whenever this creature mutates, you may cast target non-creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. This one's interesting, because I do think this is more I'm tempted with this card with, since we do have some pretty interesting, powerful instant and sorcery spells. Or even target non-creature cards, so we do have a lot of powerful free cost walkers still in the format and such. So the fact that you can usually semi-use this as just kind of like whenever you mutate to be kind of like a reanimation spell for a Planeswalker that's got put into your graveyard. This could work as just a good relative creature to have if you are playing like a Super Friends list and then just reanimating one of the more early game Planeswalkers you play. Like you play your Teferis, you play your Narsets, stuff like that. So the fact that you can use this to actually reanimate those is very powerful. I also think this could also see some funny shenanigans in quasi duplicate type decks where copying kind of like the mutated copy of the creature by mutating is kind of hilarious. We'll have to wait and see in that. But nevertheless, a free mana flying first strike is nothing to underestimate, so even with that alone, that's just still a good general body creature. I do think it has some really good chance, especially with how our mana is in the moment, to see competitive play at the moment. We'll have to wait and see, but I do think this has a chance. Especially with how many free cost walkers we have in the format. That's Void Vector, so that's the Death Touch one. Now let's actually talk about this one, which is probably one of the more playable companions I've seen so far. Garuda, Doom of the Depths. For a blue-black hybrid companion, your starting deck contains only cards with even converted mana cost. Well, that reminds me of something that happened in Hearthstone a while back. That was a weird time. Anyway, side thought aside, what happens when you meet the companion cost? You can cast this card for free from your sideboard. Well, not for free. You can cast it. Essentially, it's in your hand, essentially, even in the sideboard once. So, what happens? Well, when this enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into the graveyard. Put a creature card with even converted mana cost from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control. That card is pretty good. It's actually a really good card. I mean, yeah, 6 mana for 6/6, that's just alright stats in general. And the fact that this has the kind of like Gaunty ability that affects both you and the opponent, and the fact that you are essentially milling 8 cards, and you have a choice from those 8 cards to bring back any even converted mana cost creature onto the battlefield under your control, very powerful. Especially when you consider how many even cost creatures we have that are really good competitive staple cards in the format, Questing Beasts, etc., etc. I do think this has a chance, especially when you consider Blue-Black Mill is a very popular archetype, and a majority of their cards are even. You gotta keep that in mind. A majority of them are pretty even, so I do think this has a chance. I do think people will give it a shot. Granted, you won't be able to run Ashiok due to that deck building restriction, which I think will make some people a little sad, but I think they're going to get over it when they factor that they have a 6/6 Demon Kraken that helps them steal a creature from the opponent or be able to reanimate one of their powerful even cost creatures. I mean, the factor that we have some really high cost, even cost creatures in the meta itself, this could also just be as a silly reanimation spell to, like, maybe you mill a Villas, Broker Bud, because I think that's even cost, if I remember correctly, and be able to put that on turn 2 turns early is really silly. So, yeah, I do think this is a really good standard card. I do think this has some chance in Commander. Chance is the key word there. Okay, next up, Pacifism. This one's a no-brainer. We've seen it. If you play it in Standard, you play it in sometimes in budget builds. It's a good card. It's a good card for the limited. It's a limited art star. That art is stupidly gorgeous. It's just kind of like this big little monster being kind of like a doggo with a little butterfly. I mean, seriously, this art is freaking gorgeous. Plus, that flavor text is hilarious. If only they act all this docile, I could do something relaxing for a living. I always wanted the big biscuits. Seriously, they are really hitting it with the flavor text when you see the flavor text in some of this. Okay, let's get to the, well, otter in the room. Lurdy the Spellchaser. One hybrid of blue and a red for a companion, which the companion cost is going to sound very familiar for people who play Commander. Each non-land card in your starting deck has a different name. So in other words, if you're playing Commander, you can have this as your companion. So then what happens when that happens? Well, then, same thing as applied in Standard. You can essentially have 1 copy of these in your sideboard and such, and then be able to play it from the sideboard 1 time. And then what happens? Now, one clarification I will say for Commander. It turns out, Commander, you can play with companions. It is going to be kind of like a 101 card, so you got to keep that in mind. But what happens? Well, it's a free 2 with flash, and then when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control, you may choose new targets for the copy. Now, this is one of the first rare cards that this actually automatically got banned in Commander before it even got released. And honestly, it makes perfect sense. I know many people are a little bit annoyed, especially since this is our really cool legendary creature type, Elemental Otter. And the factor that it's now, many people would want to play this in Commander and you can't. at the moment, at least if you're playing officially. It frustrates some people. I understand the frustration, but honestly, from a design perspective, I perfectly understand. The companion cost for this is pretty much not a cost at all in Commander. Not at all. And the factor that every red and blue deck will want to play this card, I've seen a lot of really good people like Game Knights and also Budget Commander and such pretty much saying their opinion on this. And pretty much I'm going to be saying the same thing, but it's too easy of a cost to pretty much pay in Commander, and just being this as a auto include if you are playing red or blue, very just relevant. And the thing is, even though this card is not that great, it's just a dual caster mage if we're being honest. The fact that it's a dual caster mage that you can have it in your quote unquote starting hand without it having to be in your hand, and being able to use this to cast like very powerful instant sorcery spells like Expropriate and such on with Copy It and such, I do think that ability is a little bit silly. If we're talking about the companion aspect of it, I know some people still want to play this as their commander, and the best advice with that is I'm going to say it to the people who pretty much were talking about it on theirs. Just talk with your play group. If you want to just play this as your silly commander and they approve it, just play it as your commander. But I do think it makes sense that you can't have this as a companion and commander, because honestly, the cost is too easy. It's not even a cost, let's be honest, and it's just going to be an auto-include in every red and blue deck if it was legal. There we go. Besides that, though, I do kind of love the standard implication brewing challenge of this, because making Highlander standard decks has always been kind of like a fun challenge for some people, and this ability is actually pretty cute to have, I'm not going to lie, especially the factor is one of the detrimental costs with kind of like meeting the Highlander requirements is you're going to have to do different instances of spells, so you're going to have to only have one copy of each powerful spell. So the fact that this card comes in and actually helps you to duplicate the spell of incremental value, or maybe even just a burn spell, very powerful. Also, just the copying ability can be pretty good. I like this card as a fun brew me around in standard. I don't know if it's good, but it's a fun brew me around. So I'm definitely going to have some fun doing standard shenanigans with this, but being banned in Command and Brawl made perfect sense. I'm just going to be honest, it made totally perfect sense. At least that's my 2 cents on that. Next up, we're going to actually talk about the really good white mythic, as I was talking about. Mothra Supersonic Queen, 2 white, or as it's known, Luminous Broodmouth as its official card. It is an insect 3/4, and whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. This card is nuts. So, a 4-mana 3/4 flying, that's just perfectly fine in the song. But the fact that then with a creature you control dies, then just can come back with a flying counter on it, that's really nice. But even that, just the fact that this can be, we do have cards that are sacrificial outlets that we can sacrifice for free. Hello, I'm forgetting the name of it. Voidwinnow, I think it was. No, not Voidwinnow. It's the, I'm having a brain fart on the name, but it's the one with, it was the one from the Pharaohs that had escaped. We do have sack outlets in this set too that will essentially more or less sacrificial outlets that are free. Also stuff like Witch's Oven. Like just imagine, for example, just reanimating just a cat just to get an additional counter on it. And oh, by the way, that cat has flying. So then when people try to kill the cat, then you have the food counter and such. Like, even just little stuff like that is silly. But even in, like, maybe Mono Black might actually splash white to try this card out, because I do think the factor is a lot of them do have powerful ETB triggers. And the factor that you can use this as a semi-way to repeat powerful ETB triggers, very scary. Like, worst case scenario, like, imagine, like, many people have already been experienced this with Fasa and such, but imagine this, like, you have, like, an Agent of Treachery out, you sacrifice the Agent of Treachery while Mothra's on the battlefield, and then you can reanimate and have an Agent of Treachery with flying, but you still repeat the ETB effect. Like, I'm thinking stuff like that. Also, there is just shenanigans you can do, like, with Uro and such, like, sure, Uro, you're not going to have it survive, but that's still 2 ETB Uro triggers, which is very powerful, so free mana to two growth spirals as long as Mothra is on the battlefield. It's just, this card's good. This will probably see a lot of standard play. The ability is relevant, it's very powerful, and the factor that It can return creatures from the battlefield with flying counters on to make them more evasive threats. Like, imagine if a questing beast died and then you give a questing beast flying. Just imagine the implications of that. So, yeah. Or even another example is, well, no, that doesn't work. Okay, scratch. Oh, no. Yeah, this is actually... No, it doesn't get protected by... do we have board wipes that only... Like, oh, now I know what I'm thinking about. Think about stuff like in the meta where if you put this in black or white and you have stuff like Ritual Suit, like you still play your early free drops and such, but then you play Mothra, and then as long as nothing gets removed, then you play Ritual Suit to remove their board, and you have to remove stuff from your board, but you don't mind because it's going to become reanimated with counters on it. Like, the fact of how much I'm talking about this card should probably indicate that this is a card to keep an eye out on. It's really good. You will see a lot of standard play. Also, really, I do think it's going to see some slight play in Commander and also other formats. So, keep an eye on this. I do think this is going to be a standard all-stall card. Next up, let's actually talk about the Planeswalkers, and then I think these are just the original arts of the cards and such, so we'll get done with that, and then we'll talk about the Biobots promo. So let's get to the Planeswalkers just real quick. Oh, I do think we do have the Teamer Beast too, so we're going to talk about that too. So, actually, I think I'll save the Planeswalkers for last, and then we'll just talk about the Teamer creatures just real quick, and the Godzilla promo. So, let's first talk about Illumina, Apex of Witches. 2 in Teamer, so this is the Teamer variation of this Mutate cycle. And then you can cast it for, this is the one where the Mutate cost is a little bit more expensive, because it's 5 mana, and then it's 6 mana for the Mutate cost. But what happens? It's a 6/6 with Flying with Trample, so pretty powerful creature on its own. But also, whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land permanent card, put that card onto the battlefield or into your hand. This card is silly. Because keep in mind, it says non-land, so you can use this if you do mutate as your central core mechanic. The fact that you can use this at any time when it mutates, it just essentially can get a permanent card from your library into play is absurd. Like, I think this might have some potential in like Fires-based creature-oriented deck lists, because that card is very powerful. Like, Fires is always looking for cards to give them more incremental value with compensating with their deck-based restriction of you can only cast 2 spells each turn. So the fact that this doesn't cast a spell, it puts it onto the battlefield, helps overcast that requirement. So yeah, I do think it has a chance in Standard. It might be too high cost, but who knows. I do think this is a really cool commander, though. I do think a lot of people are going to have fun with this in Commander, personally. Other than that, there's also the Gloom Pangolin, 2 and a black for 1/5. Pretty much it, with some really cool flavor tests, but that's pretty much it. You play it unlimited as a curve filler. That's pretty much it. Then we have the Biobots promo, which is Godzilla, King of Monsters. 5 mana. It's also a card in the set called Zalefa, Strength Incarnate. It is a legendary creature dinosaur, 7 free, trample. Lethal damage dealt to creatures you control is determined by their power rather than their toughness. So, more or less, this card is interesting. I do think it's a very powerful Gruul aggro card, because that ability is actually pretty powerful. The factor that then creatures essentially will not get dealt lethal damage by their toughness rather than just by their power. So this is essentially more or less a 7/7, and it gives all your creatures that basic ability in Gruul, especially with how many high-attack creatures we have. That's very relevant. It has a chance to see some standard play. The keyword is some chance, so I'm grateful that Biobots promo here is more or less just a alternate variation of a card that's going to be in the set. Because I do feel like this, if this was the Biobots promo and you couldn't get this any other way, then that would feel kind of poopy. At least because I do think it does have some chance in Standard. In Constructed, though, people are going to have fun with it, so we'll see. Next up, let's get to the quick last 2 cards, and then I gotta get to bed because it's pretty late. So, let's talk about the Planeswalkers of the set. And, oh, dude, we got some good Planeswalkers. Vivian's Monstrous Advocate. 5 mana for a free loyalty Planeswalker. So, very low loyalty, but let's look at the abilities. It first has its static abilities up. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. Pretty powerful ability. But also has, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. Very powerful ability. So, it makes your hand extended to the top of your deck. We've seen stuff like Courts or Crucifix or such that does things like this, or of the spell, so don't underestimate this ability. But it has a +1 ability of create a +3/+3 green beast creature token, put your choice of vigilance counter, a reach counter, or a trample counter on it. So you choose from one of the three. That's a very powerful ability. Protects itself against flies. It also can just be used as an aggressive unit to make a creature with trample. Or just even vigilance, just so that it can be both a blocker and an offensive unit. So, very powerful plus. But the minus ability is nothing to underestimate. -2. When you cast your next creature spell this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser converted mana cost. Keyword is you're searching. You gotta keep that in mind. It's a search ability. For a creature card with less converted mana cost, and then put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. Oh boy, if there's a card that makes me want to do a Teamer Fires of Invention mid-range creature deck, it's Vivian. Vivian is really good in that deck, because let's say you cast your Fires of Invention on turn 4, then turn 5 you cast Vivian, and then you cast a really powerful 5-cost creature. Then you can tutor for any creature you need of 4 or less, which there's a lot of powerful creatures with throughout the mana curve in Magic currently in Standard. Oh boy, this card is silly. And also, a lot of buzz has been going around this card seeing play potentially in Modern because of the tutor aspect of this card. It definitely has a breeding pool vibe to it, and even then you don't have to sacrifice something. All you have to do is just cast a creature and just activate the loyalty ability. So all you're doing is technically sacrificing loyalty. So yeah, very powerful card. It will see some Standard play. It has even a chance to see Modern play. And of course, this is a great card for Commander and Brawl. Plus, playing this as your brawler is actually kind of fun. Next up, the other Planeswalker we've seen is Luca, Coppercoat Outcast, 5 mana for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. No static abilities, but it has a +1, exile the top 3 cards of your library, creature cards, exile this way, gain. You may cast this card from exile as long as you control a Luca Planeswalker. Or -2, exile target creature you control, then reveal cards on the top of your library until you reveal a creature card with higher converted mana cost. Put that card into the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Or -7, each creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. Honestly, I think this is more going to be a fun brawler Planeswalker. It does definitely have some chance to see play in Standard because both of those pluses are kind of relevant. The problem is it kind of doesn't protect itself unless you have creature on the battlefield. So the thing I'm thinking about this one is this is a one where you want to have a 3-cost creature or a 4-cost creature you cast before, then you cast Luger, then you -2 in it, and then you get a powerful late game creature to help protect itself. That's pretty cool, and the fact that you can activate both the plus and the minus, very nice. Also, it's nice to have that it has that semi-card draw. And of course, if you get to the ultimate, you're probably playing this in a creature-oriented deck design, and if you do that, you're probably going to win the game or be very, very close. So it has a chance to see some Standard play. I'm still kind of 50-50 on it. I'm almost tempted to put this along with Vivian in that Fires Teamer mid-range deck I'm considering. It's definitely something to keep an eye out on. And then in Commander, obviously, Commander players are going to love this card because it does have the sneak attack-like ability of it, and the fact that you can get pretty much a random card, which is very reddish, like getting a random card of higher converted mana cost can be very powerful, so I think it has a chance. Plus, also the comic book art that they've been doing on this is just amazing. So, yeah, I think that's all the cards that have been revealed so far as of this recording. That took a while. It's going to be taking a while with this. Sorry if the quality is not 100% the best. I just wanted to try to get my opinions out as quick as possible. I hope you all have a lovely day. Hope you keep enjoying seeing the Ikoria shenanigans. You all have a lovely day now. This is LevDev signing out. Bye.